Hey guys, welcome to a new video. Like, comment and subscribe if you enjoy. Without any further interruptions, enjoy the what if. Months after Pain's utter destruction of the village, the villagers, both citizen and ninjas, were working on rebuilding the village. Tents were set up outside of the perimeter, while the buildings were getting put together. Construction workers from other nations traveled to the destroyed Konoha site to help rebuild and provide the necessary supplies to get the job started. Moments later we see somebody making hundreds of shadow clones to quicken the pace of constructing the village. He had blonde spiky hair, tanned skin, and 6 identical whisker marks on his cheeks, 3 on each. Because of his condition, his canines and nails were longer than usual, making them fangs that'll poke out of his mouth and claws. Also, the pupils in his ocean blue eyes were slitted, making it fox-like in appearance. He continued to wear his orange and black jumpsuit. When the villagers witnessed the mass creation of blonde shadow clones, they cheered for their hero, shouting things like, "Our blonde hero has finally arrived," and "Hooray for the hero of Konoha." Some even walked up to him and asked for his autograph. Usually this would make Naruto blush in embarrassment, but after months of continuous praise it started grating on his nerves. He had things to do and these people continued to interrupt his plans. "Please people, I'm very busy. I only created the clones to lend you a hand while I was on my to do my own thing," he said, walking between the villagers thinking about just what he was going to do. After nearly going 9 tails against Pain and meeting his father face to face, he decided to search for his father's estate to collect what was his. He had thousands of clones searching all around Hyon-Kuni. His father mentioned something about his house being near a mountain. His clones checked the Cage Mountain already and found nothing. But also, considering his father's Hiroshin technique, the house could be anywhere in the entire continent. Hell, it could be in Iwagakure for all I know, which would be weird. He shook his thoughts away and focused on the job at hand. 3 weeks later. It was now 3 weeks later and the nations were at war. Of course Naruto wasn't told, but he still knew. After all, he has gotten smarter and more calmer. Right now he was in a giant turtle. He was given a mission to study and file some animals. So you could already tell he's pissed about that. Well, at least something good happened before he got the mission. He found the house of his father around 2 weeks ago. It was on top of a mountain, a couple of miles away from the Valley of the End. He climbed the mountain using nothing but his hands, as physical training of course. "I could still remember how pissed I was," the blonde thought as he sat next to a tree to begin meditating for a while. Flashback 2 weeks ago. The blonde was currently climbing a mountain. His clone informed him his father's house was near the peak. He was suffering from a mild case of nostalgia, due to the house being a couple of miles away from the Valley of the End, where he had his first true fight with someone he used to consider his brother. His head peeked over the top of the mountain, and he pulled his body over the top. He was confused how someone would put a house so far up a mountain, or how they even got the supplies up here. He was currently looking over the side of the mountain. He could barely see the ground. Suddenly a bolt of lightning passed right by his ear. Some of the bolts touched his ear, causing it to become numb. He turned around to see fireballs coming at him. He swiftly dodged, using chakra to quicken his movements. He ran forward at the regular house that was firing the techniques, but it was difficult when spikes made of earth rose from the ground under him. He didn't know how, but purely on instinct he focused chakra on the bottom of his foot, until the chakra actually became solid, and stood on the spike as it rose up. He hopped from one spike to another like this, until after the 5th hop he landed on the ground. "How'd I do that?" he asked himself, before a whirlwind surrounded him. Yet again on instinct he jumped straight in the air, over the top of the small whirlwind and landed outside the whirling. He sprinted to the house after landing, and just as he got within 10 yards a force pushed down on him. The gravity was intense. It was at least 10 times as much as it was a couple of feet behind him. "Holy Kami, I'm so heavy. What the hell is wrong with this place?" He looked up to see a structure of rock rising from the ground. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered, using all of his strength to rise to his feet. Only one of the whirling blood could command this creature. A strange voice spoke from every direction. The blonde didn't have time to freak out because the golem charged at the teenage shinobi, not having a problem with the gravity effect. The blonde was immediately punched out of the area, landing an inch from a spike. Naruto held his chest in pain. He was surprised his heart didn't pop because that hit hurt like hell. He looked up to see the golem coming at him, except this time he was even faster. Oh, I see. Without being weighed down, the rockhead could move faster. Great. Naruto thought, rolling to the side, causing the golem to miss its punch and completely destroy the spike. Not wasting any time, Naruto dashed back to the area where he knew the gravity effect would be in place. Might as well get used to it. I could use this as furthering my physical training, he said as he felt himself being weighed down again. He jumped back as the golem struck with an overhead axe strike. Naruto then jumped as high as he could when the golem threw a wide haymaker. He landed on the arm, but when the arm stopped he kept going and he was flung from his position. His face collided with the floor and he yelled into the ground. His danger sense told him to roll, and since it saved his life so many times in the past he rolled over. Just in time, because the golem's fist was in the ground. Now on his back he reached into his pouch and grabbed an exploding note and threw it in the boulder's face. Katsu, he yelled as it exploded. He used this time to rise to his feet and make a run for the house. Without even going a full meter his right foot was grabbed. He looked back to see the golem was without a scratch. This is going to hurt, he mumbled as he was lifted into the air and slammed to the ground. He coughed blood as dust rose around him. This cannot be the way it ends. I need to think of a way to put an end to this torture. He became angry, and when a small amount of Kyuubi's Yuki entered his system he began to yell. You fool, stop using my chakra. The blonde stopped the flow of demonic chakra, causing the pain to stop. Don't use my chakra again. There's something different about this place, and the use of demonic chakra causes serious pain. Remember that kanji we seen carved in the side of the mountain on the way up here? Yeah, it said, Shin, meaning pure, so I guess anything that deals with malice or hatred would get rejected painfully. Right, you need to find another way to deal with the rock. The blonde nodded as he felt himself being lifted into the air, getting an idea. As he came out of the cloud of dust he finished his last hand sign. Here, eat the only lightning technique I know, Raiden, Raidosho. Almost immediately a series of lightning bolts came out of Naruto's hands. The blonde knew that Earth was tremendously weak against lightning techniques. He was proved right when the golem exploded, causing rocks to fly everywhere. He landed on his back with a smile on his face. Ha, it's over, he panted. This time he was proved wrong when the structure began to repair itself right before his eyes. Oh come on, really? He said as he began to remember what he heard earlier. Only one of the whirling blood can command the creature. Does that mean only an Uzumaki can take control of the golem? He said to himself as the golem in question was fully put back together. The walking boulder began walking toward the blonde genin. Stop! The blonde yelled, causing the golem to falter in its step. This angered the blonde. I command you to stop. This didn't do anything as the golem continued. I said be still, Naruto yelled. 1 because he was angry with the golem, and 2 because he was feeling pain worse than when pain stabbed him with all of those rods. This had the most effect as the golem stopped. Now go back to wherever you came from. The golem nodded and began breaking, the ground absorbing it. After the last rock was absorbed, Naruto dropped to his knees, the fight finally over. After a while Naruto rose back to his feet and begun walking towards the house. Well, at least you can move easier. Yeah, that's because I had to fight a fucking structure of rock. I guess you can do anything when you have to fight for your life, even if it's withstanding gravity 10 times the regular amount. After reaching within 5 yards of the house, a hologram of his mother and father appeared in front of him. He took a step back in shock and surprise. He was more surprised when the holograms vanished. Thinking it was a genjutsu, he pressed his fingers into the ram seal and muttered, Kai, sending a pulse of chakra in all directions. He watched shocked as places in the air became distorted and just inches around the house, telling him there was some kind of barrier around the house and also where the jutsus came from. After his revelation he stepped forward, bringing the holograms of his parents back. Hey son, I see you found the house and got past the golem. That's your Uzumaki blood at work there. I was a little nervous with the idea, but I can tell, you activated the lost bloodline of the Uzumaki. Wait, bloodline? What bloodline? I have a bloodline. Unfortunately I have no idea what the bloodline is supposed to be. All I know is that there was another with it. Kushina stopped talking. Another Uzumaki with the bloodline, but who is it? I'm the only Uzumaki in the world, the last of my kind. Kyuubi, did you find anything different about me yet? He asked his tenant. Nope, nothing at all. Sorry Kit. Wow, look at you, you sure have grown. What are you, 13? Maybe you're 14 years old. I remember when you were just born, you were so small, you could fit in my hands. The hologram of the Yondaime said, holding out his hands. Naruto grew angry as the speech progressed. It seems that he was supposed to inherit his parents' place when he turned 13. He clenched his hands into fist, his nails digging into his skin and nearly drawing blood. So how does it feel being a genin? I see you're wearing the Konoha Hite 8 proudly. Minato finished his speech. At this point Naruto just walked forward, his nails drawing blood. It wasn't even a second later when blood pooled inside of his hands before it seeped through his knuckles, running down his fist and dropping onto the floor. Calm down Kit, weren't you on the training trip with your sensei during that time period? And besides, who in the village would even know about your family's private house? Nobody, that's who. Now calm down. Naruto had reached the door to his house, not paying attention to his hologram parents. He did calm down, after hearing his tenant. He grabbed the knob to the door. When his bloody hand touched the knob, seals that on the knob spread out and soon covered the entire house. This little even also cancelled the barrier around the house and his parents' holograms. He entered the house to find that it was a regular house. It had a couple of chairs and a table in the middle of the living room. The kitchen, although spacious, didn't contain a lot of food. There was only 2 bedrooms, his parents' and the other wasn't entirely finished with the decorations. He could tell though that it was supposed to be his. He found a door in the small hallway and opened it. Well, he tried to open it, he realized there was a seal with the kanji for blood in the middle. He looked at his hand, the previous blood that covered it was gone, having wiped it on his pants, and the wound healed thanks to the fox. He slid a claw over his palm, bringing fresh blood. He pressed the hand to the door, watching it light up for a while before he heard a click and the door slid open. He watched his palm heal before walking in, finding a very large amount of scrolls on Fuinjutsu, Ninjutsu, and Genjutsu. He looked around and even found some Taijutsu and Kenjutsu scrolls. After an hour in the library he left hundreds of clones to learn every single thing they could. Because let's face it, as he didn't have a chance to survive in this war. He also needed to find a way to defeat the remaining Uchiha. He stood outside of the house, getting ready to make his way down, with the thought of his mysterious bloodline on his mind. Release flashback. Naruto looked around scoffing as Kurabi wrote lyrics in a little notebook. He needed to find a way of this island. He was getting tired of all of the animals and he's only been here for a couple of hours. What kind of S-rank mission was this? Taking care of and categorizing the animals on this island. Sometimes he hated his village. Yo 9, let's go tame yo beast. The big dark-skinned Kumo ninja said. The blonde glanced at the Hachibi container. Sorry B, but I've got my own agenda, he said using a body flicker. He appeared at the peak of the Turtle Island. His headbands, tails, were blowing east with the wind. He knew he was in the coast of Kumo, and if he knew his geography, the way back home would be south. He focused wind chakra to his feet and jumped as far as he could, using his newfound skill in advanced wind manipulation to help himself glide in the air. It wasn't long until he landed on the water, half a kilometer away from the island. He didn't stop there. He focused his secondary element to his feet and vanished in a spark of electricity. Since Konoha didn't want him to fight in the war, he was going to have to go solo and face Madara himself. He had dozens of clones looking at seals at his house. He knew the man could make himself intangible for a duration of time, by putting his body in another dimension. He just didn't know how long he could stay in that little pocket dimension. So he needed to create a time-controlling seal, something that nobody has achieved, ever. Well, I'm going to be the first, he thought as he continued running on the water, thankful for his large reserves of chakra, because this was going to be a long run. Several hours later, after running for hours, Naruto was beginning to get tired of running. Constantly using lightning-converted chakra to make him go faster than he could ever dream of doing with regular chakra, was starting to really drain his chakra. He looked around and noticed a small chain of islands were near. It was time to take a break anyway. Maybe he could use the time to check up on his time seal. He walked on the little shore and dropped into a meditative position and tried to speak with one of his clones, hoping he could from this distance. "Boss, do you?" Naruto heard in his head as his clone's voice was zoning in and out. The blonde shook his head and stood up and moved to a closer island and repeated the process, getting the same transmission. He continued to do this until he gave up and just got back to running. After an hour he saw a cruise ship, a boat civilians take vacations on. It was perfect as they were going the same way he was. Now he could relax and restore lost Sharka. But not at the moment, as he has yet to board the ship. He stealthily jumped on the side of the ship and poked his head over the railing. The first thing he saw was a beautiful civilian teenage girl stretching before she got in the pool. She was bending over, her fingers touching her toes. She was dressed in a pink, two-piece bikini and had long luscious legs, and a firm behind. She had really long pink hair that went down to her firm ass, and that's all he could see of her. He quickly dropped his head back and fell back to the water. He was blushing and a small trail of blood went down his nose at the thought that popped into his mind, at what he could do to that girl. "I knew it deep down, that perverted sensei of yours has tainted you, now you're one of us." Ha 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 ha. The blonde heard a deep voice in his head. Naruto shook his head denying the accusation and formed the ram seal. He transformed into a bird and flew on the deck. He craned his neck watching the civilians, keeping up the act of a bird to some of the people that were watching him. He flapped his wings and flew high into the sky passing the clouds, where he dispelled the technique and quickly made shadow clones and they all transformed into birds. The flock of cloned birds then dove towards the ship and landed in various places, with the real Naruto landing somewhere else and dispelled his disguise. He removed his Hite-8, and proceeded to take his jacket and shirt off. After he finished he commanded his clones, via mind link, to fly to the private house, where they'll dispel their disguise and replace his other clones. All needed to complete the look of a vacationing citizen was swimming trunks. He glanced around and headed towards the lodging of the boat and looked around for some trunks. He started checking the vacant rooms, but some rooms were vacant, which made him wipe his nose. He found some trunks in a vacant room and quickly put them on after taking his pants and sandals off, sealing everything in a timed seal on his arm. He only had about 2 days before the ink was used up and his stuff appeared. The trunks looked great in his opinion. They were black with an orange fiery dragon on his left leg. He looked himself in the mirror and gave a smile as he then stepped outside and began to relax. He sat at a table and a waitress walked up to him. "Hey sir, would you like a drink to help relax?" she asked him. Her dark red hair flowing with the breeze and her large C-cup breast were straining against her white and black shirt. Naruto nodded and she brought him a drink minutes later. He took a sip and relaxed, looking at all the lovely ladies around him. "Ah, I needed this little break. I wonder if B told them I was gone yet," he thought to himself. 2 days later with the allied cages. He did what? Tsunade of the Sannin roared in anger at Naruto's stupidity, as Kurabi calmly stood there in all seriousness. He was carrying Samahade, with the previous owner, Kisame, being dead and all. "That's right, Hokage Dono, 9 just up and left. He doesn't even have his beast fully tamed yet. Without proper control he's going to be captured by Madara," the Ox Jinchuriki said. "I don't doubt your accusation, Kurabi-san. We must find him before it's too late." "Anbu," she yelled, and a 4-man squad of Anbu appeared in black cloaks. "I want you to find and bring Uzumaki Naruto back here, where he will be given his punishment," she ordered, and Anbu nodded and vanished. The big-breasted Hokage turned back to her fellow cages but was stopped from speaking when Metagai entered the room with some news. "Hokage-sama, that enemies are mobilizing." All 5 cages steeled their emotions at the news and started to mobilize their own troops, thus fully uniting the 5 nations. 3 days later, Naruto had been working on the seal that would help him end Madara's life, the entire time he was on the cruise. In private, of course. Which was hard with all the ladies wearing skimpy bikinis, and having water cling to their bodies. Making him and others enjoy their assets even more. He even had fun the last day of the cruise, with the same chick whose ass was in his face when he first tried to sneak on the ship. Man, was she kinky. "Hey kid, how many times do you think she bit into your neck?" the fox said, causing Naruto to shiver in delight after being reminded about how kinky she was. "A couple times, furball. What was her name again? Naruto asked, wearing a pair of black cargo shorts and a skin-tight rust-orange shirt. The seal on his arm too expired and he retrieved his scrolls and ninja equipment. This new attire was better than the last one and he wouldn't be recognized as easily. Well, he would still be recognized because of his whisker marks, but there was no way to hide them without wearing something on his face. Her name? Let's see, I think it was Mocha. Man, did that babe have some fangs? I can't believe you forgot her name. Kyuubi roared in his head in disappointment. I don't own Rosario plus Vampire, no matter how much I want to. Naruto put his weapons pouch back on his hip and sat in the grass. He created a shadow clone that drew seals on his wrist for his shurikens. Hey, in my defense, it's not my fault. With all the bloodsucking she did, I'm surprised I didn't pass out. No, I'm glad I didn't pass out, he said, getting up after the clone finished and sealed his shurikens. Why are you glad you didn't pass out? A voice said behind the blonde. Oh, this one Kai. The blonde slowly turned around to see Madara and Sasuke standing meters away from him. What the fuck are you doing here, and how long have you been standing there? Naruto said, getting ready to put his new skills to the test, dispelling the clones at his house to gain more knowledge. Madara smirked behind his mask as he glanced at Sasuke. Sasuke here couldn't wait to fight you on the battlefield. So after hunting for a couple days, well, here we are. We just caught a fox. Madara said, chuckling at his joke. Really? The two teens thought, glancing at the older Uchiha. Listen, old man, just let me handle this. You just stay back and don't get in my way, or I'll kill you next. Sasuke said, hopping off the tree and landed on his feet meters away from Naruto. Finally we meet again, Dobi. I hope you're at full power right now, because I sure am, the demented teen said, putting a hand on his sword. Naruto stared at his former teammate and noticed something different about him. His eyes contained more focus than rage, and his stance showed his confidence in his apparent victory. Oh, I was afraid of this, the blonde's inner kitsune said. Afraid of what? Naruto asked, unsealing a pair of elongated blades. They were black and only one side was sharpened while the other was jagged or serrated. He didn't know how to explain it. He held them in a reverse grip and got into a relaxed, but ready stance. Do you remember Uchiha Itachi? Kyuubi asked as memories of Itachi flashed through Naruto's mind. Flashback. Naruto opened the door to the hotel, only to come face to face with a pair of fully matured Sharingan eyes. It flashed again to show Itachi's body turning into a flock of crows and flying away. Once again it flashed to show one those same crows flying right into his mouth and him swallowing it. I've given you a large amount of my power, use it wisely. The blonde was left speechless, unable to give a reply to the retreating Uchiha. The image faded to show rain falling from the sky and Naruto's soaking body standing over Itachi's eyeless corpse. Nothing was said between Naruto and the rest of the group as Naruto took a knee, his hand brushing a loose strand of hair away from the Uchiha's eyeless sockets. I will, Itachi-san. The knowledge and power you have given me will help me right your wrongs, the blonde whispered as he stood to his feet. Release flashback. Naruto was returned to the area, when his memories shattered around him. He was returned to see Sasuke raising an eyebrow at his blades. Before the Uchiha could question the blonde about his blades, Naruto spoke. So you took your brother's eyes? The blonde didn't really ask, but stated it like a statement. You reached an all-time low, Sasuke Tem. The blonde seethed as his pupils stretched horizontally and he entered sage mode. He was glad he knew how to remain completely still, in any position, thanks to his training. The younger Uchiha ignored the taunt and changed his regular Sharingan to his eternal Mangekyo Sharingan, which was a weird mix of both, his and his brother's Mangekyo Sharingans. Meanwhile the elder Uchiha was watching from his perch on a nearby tree branch. Finally the time has come for these two to fight. After all, it's fate that brought them together. During the pause Naruto had continued to gather nature chakra, making the bright orange of his iris become dark orange. Then he vanished, surprising both the Uchihas at his speed. But their eternal Sharingans faintly recognized the path the sage took. Sasuke held up his Kusanagi to the left to block one of Naruto's blades. His knees buckled a little due to the power behind the strike. He was barely able to push the blonde off of him. Said blonde did a backflip and landed 3 meters away from the douchebag. The Uchiha felt liquid on his cheek and lifted his left hand to his left cheek and looked at the liquid on his fingers. Blood, but how? He muttered. His eyes darkened and a twisted smirk appeared on his face. This just became a lot more exciting, he said. The blonde smirked at his former comrade, hearing what he said. He took a couple of hops back and furthered the length of the sharp wind on his blade. He flexed his fist as he did so, to further ready himself. Madara watched from his spot and smirked at the two. It's a shame for someone so skilled to fall, they way he will. Soon I will have my pet back, only to trade it in for a better pet. He stopped thinking to return his focus to the fight. 2 hours later, the clearing had been completely destroyed, black flames were everywhere, there were craters inside of craters. In the biggest was Naruto and he was crouching in the middle, with 8 tails swaying behind him. His body composition was that of a miniature Kyuubi, minus fur and a tail. On the floor in front of the mini kitsune was Sasuke, the life in his eyes were gone on and his body was completely missing its right side. The young Uchiha's blood was spread all around the battlefield. Instead of taking full control of Naruto, the fox stayed true to the deal he and the blonde made long ago and returned the control to the team. The physical makeup of the fox's body twisted and turned in different directions and minutes later it resembled that of a human. The 8 tails morphed and contorted and converged to form 2 tails. Seconds after that the very dense Yuki removed itself from the blonde's body, causing the genin's clothes to be revealed. Or what was left of the attire. The shirt had been ruined by countless Chidori Senbons and various fire techniques. Madara stood half a kilometer away because of the destructiveness and longevity of the fight, had destroyed the area they were fighting in. I'm surprised young Naruto killed his best friend. Of course Sasuke had no intention of holding himself back, and had no doubt about wanting to kill his rival. But Naruto of all people, coming out on top, what kind of training did he put himself through since the 3 months ago? Madara began walking towards the epicenter of the destruction, watching the blonde carefully. The weight of killing his friend would soon cross his mind. Naruto looked down at the remains of his old friend. His eyes started to slightly burn and his weary body forced him to his knees. He rubbed his eyes for a while and opened them, only to come face to face with Sasuke's own face. He had a small flashback to the time he and Sasuke had an intense fight at the Valley of the End. It's ironic, isn't it, Sasuke? This time it's me over you. I wish you wouldn't have forced my hand at this. He lifted his hand to Sasuke's eyes and closed his eyelids. Jabutsu Suru, Watashi no Yujin. Rest in peace, my friend, he said softly, as the pain in his eyes subsided before disappearing altogether. Naruto paid no attention to the chakra leaving his eyes. He turned to the last and true Uchiha on the face of the earth. Kyuubi also didn't pay any attention to his cantainer's eyes. Listen, brat, you still have to get rid of the man's annoying ability. Make the seal, be careful, because he won't let you, the kitsune said. The blonde barely heard a word the fox said, but moved to do what he was planning to, which was to fortunately make the seal. The teen smirked and formed a cross seal with his fingers, Tajukage Bunshin no Jutsu. He muttered and summoned 1,000 clones that with the Kyuubi's single-tailed cloak, charged at the Uchiha. The elder was smirked and begun to show the blonde just why he was feared. If he had just become intangible and rushed the original, it wouldn't have ruined his fun. The original Naruto used his enhanced speed and hightailed it out of there. Seconds after he left, a large column of black flames shot up in the air. The memories of his clones made him work faster on his seal. Halfway through the seal, Madara appeared behind him and tried to take his head off. It would have happened if Naruto didn't sense the man at the exact moment he appeared. He began jumping backwards, still drawing the seal as fast and as best as he could. He was cursing himself for spilling sake on his previous dimension seal, a couple of hours ago when he was on the cruise. He would have made another one, but yeah, Mocha happened. Madara pursued his target and fired multiple fireballs and even a couple of air bullets at said target. The blonde dodged some of the techniques and used his tails to swat the Uchiha's body away, along with the rest of the techniques. The swat caused the man to bounce and skid along the ground. The blonde chuckled. These Uchiha did not know how to predict the movements of his chakra tails. He knew as soon as Madara recovered from the attack he was going to be pissed about it, just like Sasuke was, so he started gathering chakra in front of him. His ears twitched and he ducked, barely avoiding a bladed fan. He turned and kicked the man in his chest and rolled on the ground, thankful that he didn't mess up any of the ink for the seal. He resumed gathering the chakra, and before he knew it he was finished charging up. He compressed the ball of chakra and ate it. Madara got back to his feet. He wasn't Naruto to retain his reflexes even after just fighting Sasuke. Play time is over, it's time to end this little game. Naruto roared his chakra beam at the Uchiha and watched in satisfaction when the man was vaporized. He kept it up for as long as he could, just to make sure. He only had the beam up for at least a minute. He stopped the beam and dropped to his knees, dropping his paper and ink brush on the floor, where the ink began to travel along the paper. He had finished the seal, but what he didn't know was that it wasn't how it was supposed to be. Panting, he looked up to see Madara standing in the same spot, without any damage to his body. He suddenly gasped when his twin-tailed Yuki cloak dematerialized and he was left without the power of the Kyuubi in Sage mode. He grabbed the paper, not looking at it, and charged towards the Uchiha, using lightning chakra to quicken his pace. Within a meter of the man, he heard two words he didn't think he would hear again: Shinra Tensei. He was immediately pushed back by an invisible force. Now it was his turn to skid along the dirt. Naruto crouched to his knees and grunted in pain. A broken left arm, a twisted right ankle, 4 cracked ribs on his right side and 3 broken ones on his left would do that to you. Not to mention the blood seeping into his right eye, from a jagged cut above his brow by a couple of rocks from when he was sliding on his face a moment ago. With his right eye shut he glared at the Uchiha, angry that he had such a technique when he thought only Nagato could do that because of his Rinnegan. He rose to his feet, using his left foot to support his weight. It was useless for the Kyuubi to heal his wounds, due to the amount he already used, and his body couldn't take any more of it. He let a minimal amount of lightning chakra surge through his body, focusing on the injured spots to numb the pain just a bit. It still hurt like a bitch though. He slowly bent down to pick the paper back up, not caring that it was dirty because it was still going to help finish off this menace once and for all. Madara had been watching his target for the past minute, studying him. He knew that he was exhausted from Sasuke and still had the stamina to fight. After seeing the blonde get up, he had to give him some respect, and the only one he has given respect on this level was Hashirama Senju, the Shodai Hokage. Panting at the exertion his body was going through, Naruto slowly started to limp over to Madara. He had a plan. It was going to cause much pain to his body and he hoped it worked. The Uchiha watched the blonde start limping towards him. This kid's tolerance for pain is incredible, he thought, and his eyes widened when the brat disappeared. Naruto, using the power of lightning, rushed through the battlefield. He ran and thrust his arm towards the man and went right through him. Since he knew that was going to happen, he continued for a little over 5 minutes. He was extremely tired now, and knew that if he stopped he was going to drop, so he kept going with this thought in mind. He was surprised that the next time he tried to slap the seal on Madara, said man moved out the way instead of allowing the blonde to go through him. That's it, he could only keep up his intangible ability for 5 minutes before he has to recharge. Kyuubi, give me a little dose of chakra to surprise him and I could finally end this. Naruto said, running towards the Uchiha, for what he wanted to be the last time. Madara was carefully dodging the blonde now, and he was suffering from some anxiety since he was now vulnerable to his attacks. He was having a flashback to when he fought Konan, except this time he wasn't going to sacrifice his last remaining Sharingan eye to use Izanagi. If he did that, all his planning would be for naught, as he needed a Sharingan eye to cast onto the moon for his Moon Eye plan. He would have used Shinra Tensei again, but he was inexperienced in using the Rinnegan, and because of that he could only use it every 5 minutes. He was going to do it now, but became surprised when Naruto went even faster than he was already going. Naruto appeared in front of the Uchiha in half a second and charged up his seal, ready to slap it on Madara's chest. The Uchiha was surprised that instead of the seal being placed on him, a blinding flash of light occurred right in his face. He covered his eyes in pain since both his dojutsus were activated, while his Rinnegan couldn't be deactivated. He opened them to find nobody around him. He couldn't even feel Naruto's chakra around, none of it. He looked around, not finding the blonde. After a while he became angered. Son of a bitch, I just lost the fucking Kyuubi. Fucking Sasuke. Fucking Naruto. Fuck. Madara yelled. He looked at the sky. Zetsu, find him, search everywhere, he commanded. Black Zetsu rose from the ground a meter away from him. Yes, Madara-sama. The black thing said before sinking back into the ground. The Uchiha stood around for a while longer, just seething in rage. Ah, he roared in anger, using Shinra Tensei and warping out of the area. Now the only thing in the air was a crater inside another crater. Shinobi Central Command. The 4 cages were having a war council. The case cage was absent due to being the commander of the army, and fighting with his own squad of shinobi. And speaking of the case cage, why the hell are we just sitting here? The case cage gets to fight with his people, why can't we fight with ours? The Raikage yelled, slamming his fist on the seal-reinforced table. For once I agree with the Raikage. We are wasting time, which is something we cannot afford, with Madara out there hunting for the lost Kyuubi. I say capitalize on the Uchiha's absence and destroy this army of white, blob things. The Tsuchikage. The Raikage and the Tsuchikage exchanged looks and nodded to each other. The Mizukage rolled her eyes. You both need to calm down. We have business to discuss and we can't do it with you two complaining every few minutes. I know you want to get out there and fight with the others, I do too, but the lil cutie is gaining war experience the longer he's out there by himself, with everyone depending on his orders. The auburn-haired female said, leaning her hand on her right palm. And what would you know about leading armies into foreign territory? If I'm correct, you gained your experience during a civil war, not to mention you've only been a cage for how long? The old man asked her. Listen, 3 of us cages have only been in the position for maybe 3 years tops due to certain circumstances. We all know you and Raikage Dono have been in this position and it far exceeds our own time in office. But that subject doesn't matter. What matters is what each of us can do to help our troops in defeating the enemy. Tsunade said, entering the argument. You know what, Hokage Dono, you're right. What we have to do as war-experienced cages, is know what our enemy is going to do next. And this is why this war council has been called. The Mizukage said, supporting her fellow female cage. The other cages grudgingly agreed and calmed down. Good, now we can begin this meeting, Tsunade said, making a few hand seals and a hologram image of the elemental nations appeared. Okay, according to our scouts, the Akatsuki base is here, she said, pointing at a country in the middle of Taki no Kuni and Ta no Kuni. We are going to mobilize our troops through his own and gather around the base. We all know these white blobs are just the infantry in the army, basically cannon fodder awaiting the slaughter. But word from our ambush squad says that the enemy has reawakened the use of Edo Tensei and has made these dead puppets even more dangerous than the ones my old teammate Orochimaru used. The specifics of just who was resurrected is a mystery, but I expect our troops to expect anybody and everybody, she said as a large cracking noise interrupted the meeting. Everyone looked at their teacups to see if it cracked. All of their eyes widened when all of them had a huge crack from top to bottom. It was a second later when the cups broke completely in half and the tea flowed out of the cups and onto the desk. They didn't pay much attention to the liquid because soon after that they all began to hear a rumble that shook the room. They looked in the middle of the desk to see a swirling ripple began to distort the air. Knowing who was appearing, they each stood up. Soon Madara appeared, he leaking from his very soul, causing the 4 cages to sweat a little at the actual weight of the intent. This ki is more heavier than the last time we fought. The Sandame Tsuchikage mumbled under his breath. They each rose their head in confusion when they heard speaking. Where is he? The crazed Uchiha spoke menacingly. Tsunade gasped. Who? She simply said as anything else would cause her to faint. We don't know who you're talking about, the muscled Raikage said, trying to keep his composure. Don't lie to me, he yelled, pushing the cages to the walls of the room, not using Shinra Tensei, but with the force of his chakra. Each of the cages hit a separate wall. Ah, my hip, yelled Unoki as he felt the pain of a broken hip. The one-armed Raikage didn't feel anything from hitting the wall thanks to his dense muscles. But he did get ready for a full-fledged fight. The Godime Mizukage slid to the floor, the wall behind her melting from the excess chakra she was leaking from her body. Tsunade hit the wall but wasn't allowed to slide to the floor as she felt herself being pulled by an unknown force. Her hazel brown eyes was met with both the Sharingan and Rinnegan eyes, which surprised her. Tell me where you hid Uzumaki Naruto. I'll leave this timeline at this point. There's no point in continuing it. Everything is now irrelevant in what I'm trying to say. With Naruto. A battlefield during the Second Ninja World War. The first battle to be exact, as war just begun. This battlefield was where Naruto was found by a group of Junin. Sir, we found this boy unconscious a couple of miles away from our border on Kumo's side. The leader Junin said, laying the boy on the couch. The leader of Konoha was the Nadaime Hokage, Senju Tobirama. A young man who wore armor as white as his hair. He had red markings along his cheek line and light blue eyes. He folded his hands in front of him and glanced at the boy on his couch. He looks around the age of 5, sending him to the orphanage would be useless at this time. Now is the time of war, I must see if he has what it takes to be a ninja. We'll wait until he regains consciousness to find out what he knows. In the meantime, send him to the hospital for a checkup. Hi, they said as one picked the kid up and held him bridal style, before he jumped out the window, headed towards the hospital. The Nadaime stood, watching as his ninja escorted the young child. That kid has power deep within him. When he receives the right training, Konoha would be unstoppable, he thought as a ninja entered his office. Mission accomplished, Tobirama-sensei. One Sarutobi Hiruzen said, walking into the room. The man nodded. Ah yes, how difficult was it for you to destroy one of Iwa's stronghold? Hiruzen took a seat and leaned back a little. Well, one would think doing something like that would be difficult when one is alone. But it was much easier. Of course, I was without the use of chakra for the duration of the mission. The mission was almost compromised when I witnessed a group of shinobi locate one of my traps. What happened after? They must have been retarded because they shrugged and continued patrolling, thinking the trap was one of theirs. They shared a short laugh and stood up. Great job, my student. So do I understand you're finally going to take up one of your own genin teams soon? Sarutobi nodded. That's correct, I feel it's finally time to pass down my knowledge. Who knows, they might become stronger than me one day. Konoha Hospital 3 days later. Beep beep. Where am I? A young voice thought. Beep beep. What's that noise? It's annoying as hell. Beep beep. Wait. What happened to Madara? The machine started beeping faster. Beep beep beep. What's wrong with him? A voice was heard. I don't know, his heartbeat just went faster. A second voice said. Whose voices are these? Are they experimenting on me? Or are they finally taking the Kyuubi from me? Naruto thought. Well, don't just stand there, help me. Naruto's eyes snapped open, the bright light blinding him. Don't touch me. His voice was young, but he didn't notice because it was a little hoarse. He's awake. A female nurse stammered. She has short light blue hair and light purple eyes. She wore the standard nursing outfit. She was in her late 20s, her face was cute and her lips were tinged with blue. Her bust was a large D cup and her hips were fairly large, leading to a large rump. Her figure was that of an average kunoichi, and he could tell that nursing was just a part-time job, by the way she carried herself. But how? It was estimated that he was supposed to be out for at least another week. The second female nurse said. She was in her early 20s. She had brown hair with dark green eyes. She too wore the standard nursing outfit. This nurse was different. She wore no lipstick and her brown hair was rather long. Her bust was a small B cup, and her hips were small, however she still had a nice butt. She spent her life being a nurse, with no amount of ninja training. Naruto was confused. What do you mean, where am I? He asked. In the village hidden in the leaves. The Nadaime said, walking in the room. Naruto looked at the door to see the Nadaime Hokage. His eyes widened, his face pale, and he didn't pay attention to what the man said. Am I dead? He asked, gulping loudly. Confusion showed on the faces of Tobirama and the nurses. Wait, the fur ball. He closed his eyes. Fur ball, where are you? He yelled in his mind. With no response, his eyes snapped open. What's wrong, child? The blonde leveled a glare at the man. I am not a child. The brown-haired nurse grabbed a nearby hand mirror and showed Naruto his reflection. Holy fuck, I'm a child. He yelled, just now noticing how small his entire body was. What the fuck happened to me? He whispered under his breath. He began to have a flashback to the last thing that happened. I remember now, I killed Sasuke. Was I unable to kill Madara with him? He then began to remember his friend. Sasuke, I'm sorry again for having to take your life. His eyes began to burn like the time after he killed Sasuke. The blonde began to furiously rub his eyes, causing the nurses to panic. What's wrong with your eyes, child? The purple-eyed nurse asked. They're burning, the blonde answered the question. The senju moved closer to the boy. Show me your eyes, he spoke sternly. Naruto spent the next 2 minutes rubbing his eyes, before the pain started to lessen. He slowly began to open his eyes, causing the Hokage to reel back in shock. What's wrong? Naruto asked curiously. Yo, your eyes. The sight of the surprised Hokage surprised the occupants in the room. My eyes. Naruto thought, terrified about what he might learn. He reached for the mirror on his lap and slowly rose it to eye level, keeping his eyes closed. After taking a deep breath, he opened his eyes. The first thing he saw in his new eyes was the ripple-like pattern effect around his pupil and a light purple iris and sclera. Ah, damn it, that explains why my eyes were hurting. I have the Rinnegan, he muttered. Naruto sat in a classroom, inside of the Academy for Ninjas in Training, a week after resting in the hospital. Of course he had been questioned by the Nadaime about where he had come from, but he feigned ignorance about his origin. Since, obviously, he had no clue about how he had even got here in the first place. And what's worse, he had to attend the Academy, yet again. He didn't want to go to the Academy again, but Tobirama had already spoke with the sensei about his enrollment, so it was out of his power. The blonde was obviously agitated. Back in his time, history was his absolute worst subject, more so than math. And now he's back in time, so you can obviously see his dilemma. I hate history, I hate history, I hate history, he continued to say in his mind before a dim light bulb went off in his head. Wait a minute, I am history, he thought as tears came to his eyes. He fought back a sniff as the sensei walked in and began writing on the board. The blonde had met with the sensei a couple days ago, when the man had visited him in the hospital when the Hokage had first spoke to him. Of course nothing was said about his bloodline, as absolutely none of them had an idea about where it came from, excluding Naruto, who had an inkling about where it came from. Said sensei was a man, a Junin, judging by his Junin-style flak jacket. He was in his early 20s, he had black hair and a serious look on his face that wasn't worn when he met with Naruto. My name is Uchu Ryoko. As you know, we are at war with 2 of the 5 great nations, consisting of both Iwagakure and Kumogakure and a couple of small insignificant villages. We have our newest ally Sunagakure to help us, but the tide in this war could easily be shifted when Mizugakure gets forced into the conflict. Whatever side they join would have the upper hand in this war. But fear not, for we are in the village of Konoha, and if we survived the last war we can definitely survive this one, he said, his face softening up as he pumped his fist in the air. The students responded in kind and pumped their own little fists. Even Naruto pumped his fist, his national pride not wavering with the time travel. Now let's begin with introductions, starting with you, Ryoko said, pointing at Naruto. You didn't tell me your name when we met in the hospital, but now, he said smirking, introduce yourself. The blonde stood to his feet. Hello fellow classmates, my name is Uzumaki Naruto. I don't know where I came from, but I do know that I was found about 15 miles outside of Hinokuni. I don't know who my parents are, but all they left me is my name, he said, telling them half of the truth, since until recently all he had from his parents was his name. The teacher held his hand up, stopping the blonde from continuing. That's enough, child, all I wanted was your name, he said, studying him as if he had heard that name from somewhere. It was at the tip of his tongue, but he couldn't remember. He dropped the issue and focused on the class as a whole. Now, as this is a new batch of students, I would like each of you to stand and tell me your name, he said, pointing to the first student. Naruto began sitting down. He looked around the room, before he noticed a blonde girl staring at him. She looked oddly familiar as his blue eyes bore into recognizable hazel eyes. He turned his head and looked out the window. Listening to the students begin to tell their names caused his mind to drift. When that happened, he began to think about his possession of the Rinnegan and the disappearance of the Kyuubi. He remembered reading his mother's journal. It said that this ancient bloodline only came to the most unique of the Uzumaki clan. But Nagato had it. Did that mean that he was an Uzumaki? And what exactly happened to the Kyuubi? Naruto thought as his ears picked up the calling of another student. My name is Senju Tsunade, she simply said as she sat back down. Naruto focused on the class and there she was, the same girl that he had shared a short staring contest with. Now that he got a second look, he could completely recognize her. She was a young, really young version of Tsunade. She had the same light blonde hair, except it was short and in a small single ponytail. She was wearing a gray shirt that didn't contain any assets, unlike the one she wears when she gets older, that contains just about the biggest pair of marshmallows known to man. Her hazel eyes were filled with both the love of living with her parents and her grand uncle, who was the Nadime, and confusion about the blonde across the room. Her pants were dark green and she wore basic ninja sandals. When he began to feel amazed by her young looks, he shook his head and forced himself not to slap himself. Of course she was young, she was only 5 years old. She really did look like a complete contrast of the Tsunade he knew and loved. But now presented with the opportunity to witness the growth of Tsunade was making him not regret coming back in time. He shook his head again. Stop thinking about your surrogate mother like that, he said in his mind. But this opportunity is the best that ever happened, maybe now she could become more than a mother, he thought again as his inner pervert began fighting his outer righteousness. He stopped his inner battle when he heard Jiraiya introduce himself. He looked the same, kind of. The only difference was the red marks on his cheeks were non-existent. He also doubted the kid was a lecher like his older self. Arrow Sennin, Naruto thought, keeping tears from falling from his eyes as he looked at his sensei. And then it was Orochimaru. Either Naruto's mind was playing tricks on him or did Orochimaru actually look kind in appearance. And the polite way he introduced himself was way too sophisticated. The blonde scowled, thinking it was a trick as Orochimaru could never be nice. The scowl left his face only for it to be replaced with a temporary surprised visage at seeing the legendary sannin so young and weak at the moment. This just added to the proof that he somehow traveled back in time. It wasn't Madara's doing, as he didn't specialize in time but dimensions. Wait, does his time-space ninjutsu count? Naruto thought offhandedly. Alright class, that's enough for today. I expect you here tomorrow for a much longer day, when I will begin your training, he said, seeing some of his students groan in displeasure. Now, none of that. This war demands more ninjas to fight our adversaries, and that's where I come in. I'm here to whip you children into battle-ready ninjas, he said, dismissing the class, his students looking forward to enjoying their last peaceful day. Naruto walked out of the class with a thoughtful look on his face. His inner furball hadn't said a single thing or even made a single noise since he came to this time. Hey furball, are you in there? The blonde yelled in his mind. No answer, just like the other times. Maybe he needed to go into his mindscape and confront the giant manifestation of chakra. But now wasn't the time to worry about the fox. Now was the time to find a place of residence, since he couldn't stay in the hospital forever, no matter how nice the nurses were. He headed to the only place where said residence was going to be given to him at his age. Naruto appeared at the Hokage Tower, realizing that with the memory, his skills also remained. The blonde was beyond ecstatic. He didn't have to worry about staying in the academy, if he already had the same skills that prevented him from losing the fight against Sasuke and lasting as long as he did against Madara. That made him think about the past as he walked into the building. No, not the past, the future, but also his past, or future. Naruto shook his head of the confusing thoughts and walked into the office with a beastly grin. Hey old man. Tobirama looked at Naruto with a shocked look on his face. The other occupant in the room chuckled at the greeting. It seems he's more exuberant than you led on, Tobirama-sensei. The young sage looked at the other occupant to see a far younger version of the grandfather figure in his past life. Gigi, he thought, keeping the grin on his face and preventing tears from falling to the floor. Naruto-kun, what have I told you about calling me that? I'm not even old. Tobirama said, resting his chin on one of his hands. Naruto smiled at seeing both of his Gigi's. Well, compared to my age, you're pretty old, he said, smiling wider. We do have about a 25 gap in our ages, unless you're not 30 like you told me, he said, slightly bouncing on the balls of his feet. Hiruzen looked at the young sage in slight amazement. Are you sure you're only 5? He said, chuckling at his own question. Oh, you have no idea. Naruto thought, smiling even wider, and that was possible. Tobirama let out a big sigh. Forget about what his age could be. Where are my manners? Naruto, this Sarutobi Hiruzen, me and my brother have taught him everything he knows. Hiruzen, this is Uzumaki Naruto-kun, the child I told you about. Sarutobi looked at Naruto in thought. Naruto-kun, do you know anything about Uzumaki Mito? He asked, getting a confused look out of the blonde. Never mind, Naruto-kun, forget I asked you, he said, leaning back into his chair, keeping his other question out of his mind since it wasn't his business. Tobirama could see that the child didn't have an idea about anybody from his own clan, so he decided to change the subject. So Naruto-kun, what are you doing here? The blonde looked at the cage. I don't have a place to stay. I came here to ask for an apartment for myself. The two adults looked at Naruto before sharing a look. After a short second they began to laugh. This irritated Naruto for obvious reasons. Why are you laughing? This isn't funny. He yelled with his Rinnegan blazing to life, radiating in anger, and a weird and dangerous silvery aura surrounded Naruto. The current and future cages stopped their laughter when they literally seen the misty aura appear around the oblivious blonde. Calm down, Naruto-kun, we just find it amusing that a child your age wants to live by themselves, and sort of awkward. Now you're not staying by yourself, the Nadime said. The Rinnegan and the aura disappeared as Naruto let out a nervous chuckle. Yeah, that is awkward, isn't it? He said, rubbing the back of his head in embarrassment. But, where else can I stay other th? He stopped when he noticed the cage's smile was getting bigger the more he said. You're not thinking what I think you're thinking, are you? After a nod of the cage's head, the blonde shook his. No disrespect, Hokage-sama, but I decline your offer, the blonde said, crossing his arms. Tobirama smirked at the blonde. Nonsense, I've already completed the paperwork. All I need is your signature, he said, opening his drawer and taking out a piece of paper. Here you go, just sign at the X's, he said, giving Naruto a pen. I still decline, I don't want to impose on you and your family, he said, leaving the paper in front of him. You're not, it's only me, my nephew and his wife and my grandniece, he said, smiling softly. You mean, he said before the door behind him opened and a young Tsunade ran to her uncle. Oji-san, she said, running straight to her granduncle, hopping over Naruto and the desk and landed right on his chest, and proceeded to hug the life out of him. Oomph, he grunted as Tsunade landed on his chest. Su-chan, how was your first day at the academy? He asked. Nothing really interesting happened, but there was this other blonde boy that had an even more interesting surname. What was it again? She murmured, putting a finger to her chin in thought. Uzumaki, Naruto said, knowing he was the one she was talking about. She turned her hazel eyes towards him and gasped in surprise at seeing him again so soon. What are you doing here? She asked, turning her body to sit on her granduncle's lap. Naruto began to sit up slowly, remembering the temper Tsunade had from his time, and wondered, no, hoped it didn't come to the surface now. Well, you see, there's a funny story about that, he said, looking at Tobirama, silently asking for help. Really, a funny story, can I hear? She asked, oblivious about his odd behavior. Well, you see, Tsunade-chan, Naruto-kun here is going to be staying with us, the Hokage said. Why? She screamed. I didn't actually sign the paper yet, Tsunade-san, the blonde boy said. Well, good, don't. It's not that easy, Su-chan. I want Naruto-kun to live with a family and I don't like you being too lonely in the house. Tobirama said. I'm not alone, I have two San and Ka-chan, she whined. And plus he could live with Mito-san, she's an Uzumaki, she said, looking at her granduncle. That's a negative, Su-chan. Naruto here doesn't know about Mito-san or his clan, he explained. Hiruzen had been watching the scene and knew he had to think of something before things got out of hand, and soon he got an idea. How about I take Naruto-kun into my house? Interrupting the small argument between granduncle and grandniece. All eyes turned to Sarutobi. Really, Sarutobi-san? Naruto said, hoping his old grandfather figure was serious about his offer. He nodded. Sure, just because I'm 20 doesn't mean I don't know how to take care of a kid. Plus, after the death of mother and father in the last war, I can sympathize with the little blonde, he said, leaning over to rub Naruto's head. Said blonde squirmed out from under the man's hand and smiled at Tobirama. I agree with that idea, can I please? He pleaded at the Nadime, with Tsunade joining in. The Nadime closed his eyes and shook his head. This caused the blondes to look at each other and nod. When the Nadime opened his eyes, two puppy dog-eyed jutsus were upon him. One pair of teary hazel eyes and one pair of ocean blue eyes. Oh no, my only weakness, he thought before he dropped his head and sighed in defeat. The two blondes cheered and would have high-fived, but they were too far apart from each other. Sarutobi chuckled, thinking back to how this playful blonde was not even 10 minutes ago. Such a strong aura and that odd dojutsu of his, I must find out more about it, he thought, watching as Tobirama made a new document and they all signed it. XXX The streets of Konoha XXX. The happy young sage was walking through the village with Sarutobi at his side. He was even more amazed at all the people walking in the village, since this was obviously before the Second and Third Wars and the Kyuubi reduced the population. This brought his attention back to the subject of the fox. Since he was back in time, did its chakra or mind or something go back to the body in this time or what? When are we going to get to your house? He asked, looking at Sarutobi. Hiruzen smiled. What do you mean, we're there? He said, walking towards a 2-story house. I recently moved out of the small compound, because even with its size, it was too big for one person, he explained, opening his door. The house was simple, medium-sized living room, large kitchen with an island dining table, 2 bathrooms, 3 bedrooms and a study library. Don't you think it's like the same thing? Naruto asked. What do you mean? Well, you moved out of a compound, only to move into a large house. Don't you think it's the same thing? Naruto asked, yawning a little. Sarutobi walked into the kitchen to get some water. I guess you're right. Yet again you surprise me, he said, walking into the living room to find Naruto asleep on the couch. Hiruzen smiled and brought a spare blanket from his closet and draped it over the child's body. He rubbed his head and walked up the stairs to fix up the guest room for his new Otudo. XXX Naruto's Mindscape XXX. Naruto walked through his Mindscape after falling asleep on the couch. It was the only opportunity he had to literally jump into his mind. He walked around in the murky water. He looked down into his reflection to see his 17-year-old self. This was further proved when he noticed he was taller and his hands were bigger. He focused on his eyes to see the Rinnegan. Seeing it in this form was weirder than seeing it in his younger self. He looked around and noticed the pipes that signified his chakra pathways were much larger and glowed silver with tinges of blue. I don't remember my chakra being that color, but then again, it seems right for some reason, he thought as he continued walking in his Mindscape. The more he walked, the more perplexed he became. By this time he could hear the fox either calling him toward the caged room or its snoring. But now it was silent, and that put him on edge. He walked into the room to see the cage, but there was nothing behind it. He squinted his eyes at the cage and he could barely make out the outline of the fox's body. After having it in his sights, it became fully visible. It looked asleep, but he could tell something else was wrong with it. He took a step and was shocked to feel a small earthquake. He was even more shocked to see the figure of the fox breaking down, collapsing onto the floor. Soon all that remained was darkness, the remains of the fox fully disintegrated, and Naruto, who was completely speechless. Sochi, is that you? A voice asked from what seemed like everywhere. The blonde became alert and he jumped back and willed everything around him to turn to a sunlight clearing, with absolutely no trees to hide behind. He looked around for the intruder, keeping the amazement off his face at the sudden change in the area. He turned completely around to see a woman behind him, and that's when he remembered what the oddly familiar woman said to him. Son, he thought, taking a closer look at the woman to fully realize that she was indeed his mother. How did you get in my mind? What happened to the Kyuubi just now? How did the area turn like this? Why do I have the Rinnegan? He nearly screamed the last question at her. Kushina walked to her son, her flaming red hair blowing in a non-existent wind. She wore a plain red kimono that hid a full pair of C-cup breast and a black obi tied around her waist. The blonde noticed that said waist was slimmer than the hologram he witnessed at his father's house, back in the original time. She was barefoot, allowing the grass to tickle her feet. She smiled at the barrage of questions and tears prickled at the corners of her eyes, one question at a time, she said before engulfing her son in a hug. At first the blonde relaxed into his mother's embrace, but anger bubbled to the surface. He grabbed her shoulders and pushed her back a little, keeping a hold of her. Do you have any idea about what kind of life I've lived? How dare you act like you haven't deserted me? He said, letting go of her and taking a step backward. I've had about the worst childhood in the history of Konoha, and it's all your fault. He spoke to her between clenched teeth, it being the only thing keeping him from lashing out. The tears fell from the mother's eye before she sniffled, her own anger rising to the surface. You really think it's my fault for dying? How selfish of you to think something like that. You have no idea what I went through to get into the position I'm in at the moment. She told her son, her tone being borderline murderous. She was that mad at her son. You really think I wanted to leave a baby, my infant son, alone in a village that I knew was going to hate you? With you being the host of the demon that just killed most of their loved ones, it's guaranteed that they'll resent you. She scowled at him. This angered Naruto more than it should have, and he activated his Rinnegan in anger. Kushina smirked at seeing the Uzumaki bloodline in her son, the smirk being more prideful. It seems I touched a nerve somehow. Well, let's see if you know how to use those legendary eyes, she said, getting into a stance. My thoughts exactly, Naruto said, running straight at his mother. XXX 1 mind hour later XXX. The crimson-haired mother stood over her child, softly shaking her head. You did pretty good. Your only strength was your regular skills. Your skills with your eyes was absolutely horrendous. By the time I was your age I had already mastered the different techniques these eyes have to offer, she said. After the short fight with his mother, Naruto, whose body was covered in cuts and bruises, couldn't find the energy to move his limbs. He stayed laying on the floor looking at the cloudless sky. The apparent anger he held for his mother had ended along with the fight. He turned his head to look his mother, whose body was without a single scoff. Of course, I just received these new eyes of mine. Wait, what do you mean you mastered these eyes? He asked, bolting to his feet, surprising his mother. How is he moving so soon after the beating he just endured? She asked herself. She was brought back to reality when she heard the question being asked again. It seems you still don't understand, she said, shaking her head, before a force pushed Naruto back. Naruto's body was flung across the field, before it landed making a small crater. The blonde, yet again, watched the cloudless sky. I am so tired of that technique, he thought as his mother appeared in his vision. You see, son, these eyes only show up in a few shinobis of the Uzumaki clan. Only 5 others have ever had the privilege of having these eyes in the last 200 years, she spoke, extending a hand to help her son up. Naruto reached for said hand. That still doesn't explain what happened to the Kyuubi, or why I have these eyes, he said, standing to his feet. She shrugged her shoulders. Apparently you were of the select few, which is untold of. A parent with the eyes breeds another with the eyes. It's even more amazing that this happened. What happened to the Kyuubi? I have no idea. If I was to take an educated guess, I would have to say with the activation of your eyes you've unlocked the seal and fully absorbed the beast, she said as trees were added to the clearing. Naruto pondered on what his mother told him before he got another question. But if I absorb the Kyuubi, shouldn't my chakra be crimson or blue? Why is it silver? He asked, leaning against a tree. Does it look like I have all the answers? She snapped, scaring her son. She covered her mouth and blushed in embarrassment. Sorry, short fuse. The blonde sighed as he shook his head. That's my mother, all right. He thought, remembering his own short fuse, until he thought of something. Wait, since I'm back in time, am I still your son or what? He asked, getting a confused look out of her. I never wondered about. Technically you'll be older than me by the time I have you, that is if you don't change history or anything, she said, mumbling the last part. Well, still does it look like? Yeah, he said, interrupting her with a wave of his hand. Okay, I have a question you can answer, too actually. What are you doing in my mind, and just what did you do to get here? He asked, crossing his arms. Kushina crossed her own arms under her breast. The reason I'm in your mind is to teach you how to use your Rinnegan. Exactly how I got here is a story for another day, she said, chuckling at the look Naruto gave her. Now is the time for your mind to rest along with your body. I'll see you again, my son, she said as Naruto faded from view. XXX real world. The next day XXX. Naruto woke up with a yawn, forgetting about the trip to his mind, as the scent of bacon and eggs invaded his nostrils. He looked around and found himself inside of a plain-looking room, laying in a bed far bigger than his body. He looked down to see that he was in the same attire from yesterday. He got out of the bed to notice a pair of dark gray training sweats and a tight and sleeveless light gray shirt. His stomach growled and he promptly took a quick bath and changed into the gray clothing. They felt a little loose on him, but he just shrugged his shoulders and walked downstairs. Thinking of a good prank, he lowered his chakra signature and stealthily sneaked up to Sarutobi. "Good morning, Naruto-kun. I see your energy has returned with the nap you took," said brown-haired man said, turning around and popping the young blonde on the head with a spatula. "Itai," Naruto said, rubbing his head. "That hurt. Why'd you do that?" he said with tears approaching the edges of his eyes. Hiruzen smiled at the young child in front of him. "Nice try, Naruto-kun. I'm not going to fall for that. Unlike sensei, I'm immune to that," he said, turning back to the cooking food. "That was close. Any longer and I would have apologized," he thought as Naruto grumpily walked to the dining table. "So what's the plan for today?" Naruto asked as Hiruzen set a plate of bacon and eggs in front of him. "Well, you're going to go to the academy, and I'm going to get ready for a mission," Sarutobi said as a messenger hawk began to peck on the kitchen window. The blonde groaned, remembering about having to go to school. He quickly ate his breakfast and exited the house. He found himself in the section of the village where the clans of said village resided. Of course, the Sarutobi clan, even though Hiruzen is the last one, it was still considered a clan in the eyes of the village. Only because of the strength wielded by Hiruzen. The point being, he was on the other side of the village, far away from the academy. Luckily he had an hour before 8. The blonde gave a small smirk as he used a shunshin to vanish from his spot. Unknowingly someone had watched the blonde's little exit. One Hiruzen had been watching his surrogate little brother through the window and was a little surprised to see said blonde vanish with a C-rank supplementary technique. A child shouldn't be able to do that technique, let alone even mold chakra. "Who exactly are you, Uzumaki Naruto?" he thought. XXX Training Ground 7XXX. Naruto walked into the training ground, finding it empty. Well, not entirely. One young Orochimaru was seen punching one of the newly placed logs. Naruto tried not to sneer, but said sneer just happened to creep onto his face. The blonde wanted nothing but to just kill the future S-rank criminal. He was preventing from doing so, when Orochimaru turned around. "Oh, I didn't realize I had an audience. Hey, you're the Uzumaki kid, it's a pleasure to meet you personally," he said, walking up to Naruto and extending a hand. The blonde wanted so much to be rude and leave him hanging, but he had sort of an epiphany. Maybe he could prevent Orochimaru from ever becoming evil, and he'll become an ally in the future. He smiled and extended his own hand, shaking the hand of what he wanted to be a sure comrade. "And you're, Orochimaru, it too is a pleasure to meet one such as yourself," the blonde spoke to the pale child. Though Orochimaru was dressed in a noble-looking kimono, he was outside in the dirt, training to get stronger. At the moment Orochimaru didn't resemble anything dealing with nobility. "So are you here to watch me train, or are you up for a little sparring match, to test skills?" "Of course," he spoke, taking a few steps back. "That is if you have the skills," he added, bouncing on the balls of his feet and relaxed into a ready stance. The blonde smirked. "Cocky little brat," he thought as he began studying the young fighter in front of him. Based from what he knew about the adult version, Orochimaru was very slippery like any other snake would be. But this Orochimaru was different. The adult was always anticipating the moves of his opponent and was a master strategist, on the level of any Nara. This version wasn't any different, was he? After a minute the blonde finally slid into a stiff stance, not ready to reveal any of his skills at the moment. Come hither," motion later, and Orochimaru charged at the blonde. Naruto waited until the last moment to relax his stance and shuffle to the right, narrowly dodging a punch. Apparently he didn't move far enough as Orochimaru dropped and swept him under his feet. Naruto acted fast and shot a hand to the ground and reinforced it with chakra before using it to push off the ground. He vaulted himself a few feet back and landed on his feet. As he landed, Orochimaru was already on him, sending punches and kicks that were all blocked or dodged. "I think I spoke too soon. My taijutsu isn't as good as I thought it would be, must be because of the small body," he thought, catching a kick and picking Orochimaru up and throwing him across the field. 5 minutes have passed in the fight and Naruto could tell that Orochimaru was just getting started. With a few hand seals, 3 copies of Orochimaru appear. Let's see if you can handle this. He spoke as the 3 copied children charged. Naruto smirked, letting his Rinnegan flash into existence only for a second. He himself charged, but instead of going for the one in the middle, he veered to the left and sent a punch that knocked the unsuspecting Orochimaru to the ground, the other 2 clones disappearing from existence. My Rinnegan was able to determine which ones were the fakes and which one was real in such a short amount of time. I love this thing, he thought, staring at the boy on the ground. Other than a small amount of blood leaking from his lip, nothing else was visibly wrong with him. Sorry about that, I got a little carried away, Naruto said, extending a hand. Orochimaru shook his head. No apology needed, this just showed me that I need to work on my taijutsu more, he said, allowing Naruto to help him up. And plus I just need to learn to dodge your wicked left hook, he said as they shared a laugh. Well, I must be on my way, I don't want to show up at the academy looking like this, he said, trying and failing to brush the dirt from his kimono. I see you later, Naruto, he said, running back to the village. Naruto sighed, looking down at his own gear. It wasn't as dirty as he thought it would be, maybe because he never hit the floor like Orochimaru did. He was a little sweaty though, but that was nothing. XXX 10 minutes later XXX. The blonde had been walking around for about 10 minutes before he found himself at a spot he spent a lot of time at. Except there was one important thing missing. Where the fuck is the Ichiraku ramen stand? He screamed in his head. Surely I believed Chuki and Sarutobi were the same age, he thought as he witnessed a short boy walking with his father. Said father was walking the boy to civilian school, and Naruto's ears heard the words, "Are you ready for school, Chuki-kun?" And a response, "Hi-to-san." Naruto felt like pulling his hair out. He didn't know how long he'd last without the best ramen in the world not existing yet. Classic anime tears fell down his face as he solemnly trudged his way to the academy. With his current pace, it took him a while to enter his classroom. As soon as he sat in his seat, his head dropped onto the desk, sounding a loud thud in the class. The class wasn't full, but there were a few students in there, including Tsunade. They all watched Naruto, not knowing what was the matter. When Naruto felt a hand on his shoulder, he looked up to see Orochimaru there smiling at him. "What's the matter with you? You should be happy you defeated me, because it won't ever happen again," he said, chuckling as he sat down. Naruto smiled. "Yeah, sure, because my win against you was a total fluke," he said with sarcasm practically dripping from his voice. Orochimaru smirked. "You damn rig, wait," he said, his smirk dropping from his face as everyone heard a loud noise. The children turned around to see Jiraiya on his face and a wisp of smoke around him. Naruto looked at the wooden floor to see a long scratch from one of Jiraiya's getas. "Poor arrow Sennin, I hope this doesn't get worse," the blonde thought as Jiraiya wiped his face and quickly appeared behind Tsunade, surprising the blonde at his speed. "Oh Su-chan, please don't pay attention to what just happened. You know you deserve only the best of entrances, babe," he said, taking the female blonde's hand and kissing it. Well, that would have happened if Tsunade didn't use righteous female fury to punch him, a hit that sent him out of the open window that was on the second floor. "I don't even know you, lecher," she said, rising a fist at the open window. Naruto's eyes widened at the event. Holy crap, it's just like always. Well, at least we weren't on the third floor. Naruto sighed, shaking his head. Shortly after, the teacher walked in the room with Jiraiya on his shoulder. "What just happened?" he asked, setting Jiraiya down. The white-haired child didn't have a scuff of dirt on him, except from when he fell on the floor in his bruised cheek. Sensei must have caught him. Everyone thought the same thing. Well, long story short, the Dobi was being a pervert, Orochimaru said. Naruto cringed a little at hearing that word. "What do you mean? The year just started." Orochimaru shrugged his shoulders. "Be that as it may, I could already tell he's going to be dead last this year." Naruto shook his head. "You never know, a dead last could become a Hokage if he has the proper training," he said, knowing not to affect what happens to Jiraiya's training, due to him becoming a cage-level ninja in the future. "Really? You think I can become that strong?" Jiraiya asked with hope in his eyes. Naruto looked at Jiraiya, staring into his eyes, and recognized the look. The need for positive assurance, the look of determination and a hint of hope. The blonde remembered that Jiraiya was an orphan as well and needed this boost of self-esteem. With a nod of the blonde's head, Jiraiya smiled brightly and looked at his sensei. "I'm ready for whatever you throw at me," he said confidently. Ryoko's eyes went from Jiraiya to Naruto's. To think, he had that kind of ability, to bring anybody's self-confidence to the surface. A true morale booster, possibly leadership material. He smiled as he turned around and walked to the front of the class. "Excellent, I shall begin your training now. Trust me, you'll stop hating me when it's finished," he said vaguely as all the students took a loud gulp. "Oh please, how bad can it be? It's going to be a piece of cake," Naruto unknowingly thought out loud. It was too late as he realized his mistake. Ryoko smirked. "Oh really?" he said, chuckling darkly. XXX 1 year later XXX. Currently the blonde was evading the strikes of 3 students, Tsunade, Jiraiya, and Orochimaru. Each of the students were wearing dark gray training pants. Naruto was wearing a very dark orange shirt, Tsunade was wearing a dark green blouse, Jiraiya was wearing a dark red shirt and Orochimaru was wearing dark blue shirt. Of course the colors had a purpose as Naruto dodged another strike and kicked Jiraiya in the stomach. "Red!" Ryoko yelled. The male blonde released a small sigh of release as he charged at Jiraiya, along with the rest of the participants. Tsunade was the first to approach Jiraiya, sending a punch his way. In desperation for his life, Jiraiya quickly formed a seal before the fist connected with his face. A wooden log replaced the white-haired child. A large dent with multiple cracks appeared on the dense log from Tsunade's punch. Jiraiya appeared in the air behind Orochimaru, kicking at his head. Said child used his snake-like ability and ducked his head under the approaching leg and twisted his body around and grabbed the other foot and slammed Jiraiya to the floor. Sadly for Orochimaru, the body vanished into another log. He couldn't react in time to dodge the next punch. Fortunately he was protected by Naruto, who caught the punch that would have connected with Orochimaru's head. "Amazing job protecting your teammate," the male blonde heard his teacher yell from the sidelines. Naruto didn't have time to congratulate himself on the praise as Jiraiya tossed him over his shoulder and quickly swept Orochimaru's feet from under him. Tsunade, who was about to punch Jiraiya, stopped as she heard her sensei yelled, "Blue." This time it was Orochimaru's turn to evade his classmates. He quickly pushed himself off the ground and formed the ram seal. Shortly after 8 clones appeared around him. "Which one is the real me?" he said. Jiraiya and Tsunade each turned to Naruto, who always could see through these kinds of tricks. They were surprised to not see him in their sights. Currently Naruto was in the air, having used chakra to rocket himself into the air to prevent any of them from seeing his eyes. He smirked. "Just because they're not regular clones doesn't mean you could evade my eyes," he said softly, deactivating his Rinnegan, which he had extreme training for. "Attack the one on the far right," he yelled to his teammates as he dropped on the far left and began destroying the Earth clones, with his hands encased in electricity. The sensei Ryoko stood from the sidelines with a proud smile on his face as he watched his absolute best students training in this team exercise. I don't need to explain the exercise, do I? It was obvious that these students mostly benefited from his intense training. The others didn't stay that long after the amount of injuries they sustained. It truly is a shame, he thought looking at his other students. None of them were special like the 4 on the training field. They didn't have the mindset to go into the battlefield, and truly, they're not entirely battle-ready at the moment. They're only children after all, but these 4 are something else entirely, he thought, returning his gaze to the training field. "Green," he yelled, seeing Tsunade not become on the defensive. After 5 more minutes of Tsunade defending herself and evading every possible hit, Ryoko ended the training. "Excellent, truly amazing, you 4 are truly my greatest pupils," he said, chuckling. "Now for evaluations, Tsunade. Being a girl, I wanted to lighten your training a bit, but I'm glad you forced me not to. You truly are reaping the benefits of my training. Jiraiya, that booster in the beginning of the year was just what you needed to rise up from being a loser in the eyes of your classmates. Orochimaru, a genius in the eyes of many, a prodigy in the eyes of the rest, a true ninja of the era. Lastly Naruto, I believed you were all talk, but you have proven me wrong with your strategies for battle, and whenever things would go wrong, you were always able to think on your feet, and that is exactly what is needed on the battlefield. I would pass each of you, if I could, he spoke, confusing his students. What do you mean, sensei? Tsunade asked. Of course you could pass us, we're too good to sit in a classroom. Jiraiya said, puffing out his chest. Believe it or not, I agree with the pervert on this one. Orochimaru said. Hey, I'm not just a pervert, Jiraiya said. Jiraiya-dan. Naruto tried to say, but it was too late as he, Tsunade, and Orochimaru covered their ears and closed their eyes. I'm a super pervert, Jiraiya yelled with huge fireworks erupting out of nowhere. Jiraiya stood in a pose with the peace sign high in the air. Ryoko stood with a tick mark on his head. He promptly smacked the child in the back of the head. What have I said about being an idiot? He said, running a hand through his hair to relieve a bit of his frustration. He let out a huge sigh. Like I was saying, I can't graduate all 4 of you unless you pass the graduation test in a few years. Also, never in history has there been a 5-man cell, so you 4 won't be able to be together anyway, he said. Oh, I beg to differ. A voice was heard. Hokage-sama, Ryoko said once he turned around to see whoever disturbed his class. What are you doing here, Hokage-sama? He asked. The Nadaime and Sarutobi were seen walking up to the small group. Oh, I was just in the neighborhood and wanted to check on my grandniece and her friends, when I heard what he said, stopping in front of said girl to rub her head. What exactly does that mean? Naruto said softly, smiling, noticing the twinkle in his niece-san's eyes. It means that I have decided to take all 4 of you as my students. Congratulations, you 4 will become legends. Hiruzen said, crossing his arms as Naruto cheered, taking his dark orange shirt off and tossed it in the air, before running at the professor. The shirt thudded to the ground with a loud thud. This didn't surprise the class, but it did surprise Ryoko. Wait, Naruto, how much does your shirt weigh? Said Senesi said, walking up to said shirt. The male blonde inwardly cussed himself out for forgetting, a 15 pounds like everybody else's, he said. Ryoko stared into Naruto's eyes. You're lying to me, he simply said, picking up the shirt. Now tell me. Naruto mumbled the answer. Excuse me? Ryoko asked. I said 55. The sensei shook his head. Do you understand how reckless that is? You could have injured yourself beyond repair with that much weight, weighing down your small body, he said. At the age of 6, Naruto was very much in shape. His body was very lean and muscular, with a little fat, from the large amounts of food he eats to keep his energy. He kept the perfect balance between muscle and fat. Sensei, he's not the only one. Jiraiya said. I myself have 35 pounds. He said, taking off his own shirt and tossing it behind him. A thud was sounded, like Naruto's. I as well, sensei, Orochimaru said, taking off his own shirt. Everybody stared at Tsunade. What? I only had 25, I'm not crazy like they are, she said, crossing her arms. And I'm not taking my blouse off, she added, glaring at Jiraiya. It's not like you have anything to hide, flat chest, he said, crossing his own arms. Tsunade growled. What do you expect? I'm 6, she said. And I'm going to kill you, Tsunade screamed, ready to use some female fury before Tobirama stopped her. Would y'all calm down, acting like a bunch of kids? Ryoko said, crossing his arms. We are kids, the 4 children said to their sensei. Oh yeah, I keep forgetting. Because 6-year-olds aren't supposed to be nearing Chunin level, he said with pride etched into his voice, since he did a major part in that. Well, we are a great pair of children, Naruto said offhandedly. Oh no, you Naruto-kun, you're different, I could sense there was something odd about you, apart from the other 3. Ryoko said, taking a small step towards the blonde male. What do you mean? I couldn't possibly be any different, Naruto said, hiding behind Hiruzen. Now that he's said it, Naruto-kun, I do believe I noticed something about you in the past year. You meditate for hours only to fall asleep after. You trained yourself continuously before and after school, like you were trying to regain something you lost, he said, scooting Naruto in front of him. I was going to, but I would like to see Ryoko-san test your skills. The blonde glared at Sarutobi before he turned his gaze to Ryoko. Can this at least wait until tomorrow, when I regain my energy? Yeah, come on, sensei, at least give Naruto-kun time to prepare for the fight, Tsunade said. And just because he's different doesn't give you any reason to try and fight him. Jiraiya said with anger in his voice. It is illogical to fight a child, you're a Junin for crying out loud and he's only 6. Orochimaru said. If you fight him, you fight all of us. Jiraiya said moving in front of Naruto, before being joined by the rest of them. Ryoko stopped. No, just look at your friend, he's ready for anything, he said as they looked at Naruto. The blonde had his head down, his bangs overshadowing his eyes. A smirk was on his face as he started grinning. You're right, Uchu-sensei, after all deception is the most basic skill a shinobi must have. If you're really up to the task, how about I show you just how strong I am? He said looking up, his Rinnegan eyes on full display. XXX Omake first day of training XXX. Naruto was seen with what looked like a 15-pound boulder on his shoulders, while walking on a bridge of earth surrounded by water with water sharks lurking waiting for him. I may have spoken too soon. Naruto mumbled to himself as he began walking across the bridge, 1 foot at a time. On top of the boulder was Ryoko, further weighing it down. He was currently laughing his ass off. Do you fear my training now, Naruto-kun? Is it still easy for you or do I need to up the ante? He said laughing more. Naruto took another sturdy step. Why do I have to do this exercise, while everybody else only has a boulder? They don't have a bridge or nothing. You're a sadist. He said taking another step. Oh please, this is a piece of cake is it not? The sensei said laughing louder. Naruto turned to the others. What are you still doing here? Run, this guy is crazy. He said only for a kunai to drop from above and slightly cut his cheek before a whip came out of nowhere and hit his behind. Go faster Naruto-kun, I thought you said it was going to be easy. He said laughing again as he whipped Naruto again. You're crazy. He said as he went faster. It's a madhouse, a madhouse. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video be sure to like, comment and subscribe as well as checking out the author on fanfiction.net.